to the show. My name is Kareem Kanji. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, our guest is Mark Farmer, who I first met at PodCamp a couple of PodCamps ago, where you gave a talk on 6 million stories, I think is what it was called.
That was probably the one, yeah.
Yes. And it was great, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But just a quick bio on Mark. Since 1999, he's been in the web and communications space. Most recently, he has led web and social programs for the Royal Ontario Museum, Intuit, and now York University. He's also the principal at Webness, which is a consultancy operation based here in Toronto. Thanks a lot for coming by.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, man. Since 1999.
Yeah, actually, even further back, 97 is when I first got my hands on HTML, and started out doing web design and development, and that was fun back in 97. That was when Netscape Communicator was still around.
Wow.
Yeah, going way back.
What were you doing like right before then?
Oh, so I started in communications, public relations, that sort of thing. Did a degree in journalism, and the funny thing is, in the communications environment, there's usually a very low level of technical expertise. So if you had even this much, you become the go-to guy for computers. So in the ad marketing agency I was in, I became the troubleshooter, and then I decided, wow, I kind of like computers more than people. I should probably pursue this. I did, but then the career came around full circle into communications.
Into social now.
into social, digital. So I actually like people. I like them.
You love them now.
I do. Give me money.
So you talked about Netscape Communicator, and you know, literally within the past 4, 5, 6 years, tons of things have changed.
Yeah.
You know, ever since I started doing these conversations, many things have changed, obviously. But what has been the one thing that you would say that hasn't changed?
Good communication. Yeah, everyone thinks that if you want to get into social, if you want to get into digital, it's about the technology. It's never been. It's about communications. So that's why if you're coming out of a communications degree or even journalism, anything like that, that's a good setup for being a social media manager or community manager, anything like that, because it's really just about human communications. And that hasn't changed since we came out of the trees. So in terms of what hasn't changed, it's that solid communications background that's really going to help you.
And now, you know, instead of asking you what has changed, naming off like 15 different social sites that were here and are here, without going into that, what things have changed?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that's changed is upending the old order. I mean, everybody knows about what's changed in terms of media, in terms of broadcast, in terms of the death of print, that sort of stuff. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that there's a whole bunch of people out there right now that really don't understand these media. And they're threatened by them. And they're just looking to still be relevant and to still make a living. And so they understand that changes happen, whether they're like a senior VP or a director or a president, but it's not easy to deal with change, to conceptualize it, and then to embrace it. So a lot of people out there are really fearful. They want some help. They're a little afraid to ask for it sometimes, but they know that they need it. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I see is, like, unlike any other time in history, really, the rapidity of change is happening so fast that the senior level of direction can't keep up in a lot of cases. And that's never really happened before. There's big revolutions, but they've happened a lot slower than this. Yeah. This is really upending the apple cart for a lot of people in their careers. And
is it because it is so simple to, I shouldn't use the word simple, but it almost seems that, you know, a new tool or platform is coming out, or you know, the places like Google and Facebook are you know, seem to be changing in how people and companies can use them. Is it that sort of change that we're talking about?
Yeah, the platforms, but also the approach. So the idea that everything is democratic and flat now. It's a flat world. Before you had hierarchies, you had a publisher, say, that controlled the means of production of the newspaper, and you needed to buy a paper version of it. Now, all that's gone out the window. Anybody can get any information they want instantaneously. So today we heard about the tweet that went around the world. Somebody hacked into the AP Twitter account. They posted that there was an explosion in the White House, and instantly the Dow went down 150 points. So with that kind of flatness, I mean, obviously it's not a great example because it was a hack, but when information is instantaneous and when anybody has access to it, the world is flat. And people have put that idea out there before, but what it really means is a revolution. And so if you've got that, nothing's the same.
Interesting.
Nothing's the same.
And so, so you have this example that you just gave about what happened today. You obviously have the debates that have been going on, since the beginning of this past weekend, in terms of the role of Twitter, Reddit, CNN messing up what did or did not happen in Boston. What is, I understand what that means for media, democratization of media that way. What does that mean, or how do CEOs and senior executives, when they see this and they internalize it in terms of what that means to companies? I'm curious. You work for a big institution. You've worked for big businesses as well. How are they responding, and what do they think about things like this?
Again, it's a threat partially. There's businesses that get it better than others, and without going into naming names,
sure,
it's about your ability to embrace change, which sounds like a cliche, but to get beyond your own inhibitions. So this is very threatening, and in the past you had control over every aspect of how information was disseminated. If you were a network, you could control the schedule, the commercials, you had a steady revenue stream. Now all that is being eroded and it's going out the window, and we're seeing more announcements every day about layoffs in traditional media, that sort of thing. So there's recognition that everything's changed, but the thing is, people don't keep up with change as well as the technology does. So the technology is always changing, people are still people, and they don't deal well with fundamental change, especially when they're in the later part of their careers. And those are the people who are the decision makers. They're the ones that have all the power, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
So those individuals sometimes have real trouble making the kind of business decisions that may need to be made based on all this technology that's changing fundamentally all the time. And it's also a bit threatening because you had control before. You had a hierarchy. You were the top dog. Now, it's more than a little bit threatening, if maybe not insulting, when somebody who is half their age comes along and can, maybe in their perception, dictate to them what needs to happen. There's a lot of ego involved. And like I said, this sort of change this fast hasn't really happened before. The hierarchy and the way that businesses work has never been upended this fast, this fundamentally. So that's a real threat. That can be. It
used to be generational change. Now it's like weekly.
And some of the industries I mentioned are really taking it on the chin, like traditional publishing, like traditional broadcasting. So when you get that kind of change, what do? You can roll over and play dead, or you can recognize that you need help. And the thing isn't giving the keys to the kingdom to the next 20-year-old kid that comes along.
Sure.
It's being able to get the right advice and metabolize that information and make good business decisions, because the fact that maybe you've been around for 20 years isn't a liability. You've got tremendous wisdom, tremendous ability and insight. That doesn't change. It's just the ability to apply that using the right technology that's changed. And that's where sort of the next generation comes in. It's more of a helper role.
Interesting. With keeping on that same thread, the past 3 brands that you've had the opportunity to work with, Royal Ontario Museum, Intuit, and Scotiabank. I want to kind of start at the ROM. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you went in there to do a website redesign. It seemed you did a lot more than that. And is that a result of this change, where they said, all this new stuff going on the past few years, where it was like, Mark, you are redesigning the website. We appreciate the strategy and your insights, but we also sort of need your expertise in this. What do we do now? I'm very curious in terms of your work there, how that changed over the almost 2 years that you were there.
I just recognized an opportunity, and that's how a lot of change happens. Is nobody was really doing social media in a concerted way there. So I was helping out with a website redesign with a content management system implementation. And content management has to do a lot of the time with social media, how you connect that content with the outside world through Facebook, Twitter, what have you. So it was a natural mesh. But one of the best parts of managing any career is recognizing opportunity. So it's not that there was a job description that I took on.
Sure.
It's that there was something there that I could do. So I stepped into it. And that's a good piece of advice for anybody, is recognize the opportunities in your career and take advantage of them when they present themselves. So I was hired to do a content management system. I helped them with their social media and just kept rolling with that.
Nice. I remember you telling me when we first met for coffee, maybe a year ago or something like that when you were still with the Royal Ontario Museum. And you talked about how people that worked there took ownership of social. I was wondering if you can talk more about that in depth and explain, how that worked and why you felt that was very important.
Yeah. It's easy for somebody to come in and tell an organization or try to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't really accomplish anything if people aren't going to integrate that in their day-to-day. And that's one of the things I think the ROM started to understand was the importance of assigning responsibility for this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And starting to experiment a little bit. I think it really picks up with the guy that's there now, Ryan Dodge, who kind of stepped into that role after I left. Because it's a very slow process. With an organization like that, it has hierarchy, it has bureaucracy, you can't get around that. So how do you sort of become a change agent? And one of the things you do is to find the people who are the advocates, the allies, and help them help themselves. And so these are people who are willing to take ownership of something, to experiment, to try. And those are the people you need to tap into. Because in any organization like that, it's not about documents and coming up with strategy and guidelines. That gets you nowhere. What gets you somewhere is finding people that are willing to try things. And that's the biggest part of the strategy, is not coming up with a document, because that's not going to drive anything. It's coming up with the people that are willing to try things and just start experimenting. So I think that's one thing that they're really coming around to, is that experimentation, that ownership for trying things. You said something that I think that's very important that I don't want people to miss. You talked about there's strategy, and then there's experimentation. Right. So I'm curious, because, we come across a lot of organizations and clients that say, help us to create a strategy, help us come up with our digital strategy, help us to come up with our social media strategy. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, and I think when Ryan and I were having coffee this afternoon, we talked about, it's not like you have a nail in a hammer, you've got an instruction book saying this is how you use it, and here's how it's going to work. On social, it's like we don't know whether this specific line of content is going to engage or not at this particular time on this day and this year, because there might be something else going on in the world that's going to, eclipse this. So I'm curious, how do you, when you're talking to the C-suite, who are going to make that final decision on whether or not this moves forward or not, how do you balance both of them, saying, okay, they want a strategy, but we have to also be nimble and sometimes reactionary and sometimes experiment? Yeah, well, Napoleon was a great strategist. He had a great quote, which is, the better part of strategy, I'm paraphrasing, is to engage the enemy, then wait and see. Okay. So that's something you can apply to business, because a lot of the C-suite believes, rightly or wrongly, that you come up with a strategy that drives things forward. You create a document, and that's going to tell people what to do. And what I like to tell them is, a document drives an organization the same way a coat ornament drives a car. It doesn't. It looks great, and it's out there in front, and it's inspirational, hopefully, but it really doesn't drive anything forward. People doing good work, committed people, drive things forward. So I kind of have to educate them a little bit about the fact that, you do need a strategy, but ultimately it's not that that's going to make change happen. It's rapid experimentation, it's iteration, it's whatever you want to call it, but it's getting things done. So once I'm able to explain to them, and hopefully they internalize the idea that it's not about a document, it's not about a Word doc that's nice and shiny and bright and comes out of the heavens and leads the way. It's about people. And they start to get around to the idea that this is going to be work. This is going to be a lot of hard work and experimentation. Because every time you do this, it's unique. Every organization is idiosyncratic, everyone is different. And the template you use for this one is not going to be the same as the template you use for that one. And that's a real learning. That's hard to get around, because again, for years, business has been about there's a guy or a girl, and they're a consultant, and they're going to lead the way, they're going to tell us what to do, and they have this tremendous insight, and they're almost magical. It's never like that. Even Mitch Joels of the world don't have a template they can apply to every organization. If they did, Mitch Joel would be a billionaire right now. Absolutely. He would just need to copy and paste in every single place, but it doesn't work like that. And you can have the brightest consultant, but they're still going to make mistakes, because you're different from every other organization in the world, even the ones like you. So it's not about the document, it's about doing things. And so that can either scare people, saying, oh my God, we got to figure this out, or it can excite people, saying,
awesome. I don't need to know everything. I can just go and there'll be some rules on, what language to use and so on, but I can just go and see whether this sticks or doesn't stick, or whether it works or doesn't work.
Yeah.
In your experience, who do you find the types of people that are scared, and who are the types of people that get excited about that?
I think that the ones that get the most excited are the ones that maybe don't come from the traditional, CEO mold, the ones that maybe come from the outside. So I know that Janet Carden, the director of the ROM, came from a museum in Sydney, and she wasn't from the traditional CEO track. She was a museum type. She was a PhD. She curated medical history in London. So because of that, I think that she didn't come up with the preconceptions and maybe some of the prejudices of the traditional mainstream business type CEO. So she was willing to try things, or at least give us the lead to try things. I think that's the kind of person that is willing to experiment. I would hesitate to come up with the kind that isn't, just because I've met some of them and I wouldn't want to inadvertently identify them. There's people in my past that I know haven't dealt with this. Now, the thing is that the ones that are not comfortable are kind of having to get comfortable, because there's no other option. And we know that in 10 or 20 years, a lot of, in fact, all of this C-suite right now will be retired. So once that happens, there's going to be a real shift. I think maybe even as soon as 5 years, you're going to see this get integrated and become mainstream in a way that it's not even right now. When we talk about change, we talk about social media, digital media becoming important. That's going to be so much more accelerated within 5 to 10 years as that C-suite rollover happens.
Interesting.
Because, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of really bright people at senior level who understand this and who support it. And you look at people like Boyd Neal at Hill and Knowlton, or Margaret Abbott, who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who are really bright on social and digital and get it. So it's not like age is a barrier. It's just if you've been in a very comfortable place where you can keep playing from the same playbook for the last 10, 20, 30 years, why change? Well, of course you may be threatened. But it's not an age thing. It's just how flexible are you, how agile.
Interesting. So that's a little bit about ROM and some of the things that you did there, and then you went to Intuit. What were you doing there?
So I was social media manager for them, for the global Intuit business division for Canada, and I learned a lot there about agility, because they're a big fan of a guy named Eric Ries, who wrote the Lean Startup. And it's basically an idea that you want to start doing experiments, bang, 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 so you can figure out what works and what doesn't. Which is great, which is exactly what you need to do in business. Again, it's not about coming up with a roadmap for something that you don't know. It's about trying stuff. You kill what doesn't, you do many more versions of what does. So that's one of the things I learned from Intuit, was that ability to embrace risk. And man, does every organization need to do that, but very few do it.
Very few. And a huge organization into it. They're not like a small mom and pop shop. They're a massive organization, so it's kudos to them.
Well, they pride themselves on being I forget what the word is, like the 10,000 person startup. So I started as a startup about 20 to 30 years ago in a guy's living room, essentially. And now they're a huge multinational, but they like to have the idea that they have that at their core, at their soul. And that's one thing that they do understand, is that ability, that need to experiment rapidly. Rapid experimentation, it's core to them. So I think that's one thing that public sector can learn from private sector, because a lot of the public sector can be a bit, I don't know, we're a bit snobby about, we're not like private business, we have an altruistic mandate. We're out there to either educate or inform or things like this. But there's things that private sector companies do well. And if you think about it, it's experimentation, it's risk, it's acceptance of the fact that you might fail. Without any risk, there's no innovation. Right?
Of course. And then you move back into the public sector, now with York University, digital strategist. What are you doing there?
So I strategize the digits. Aside from that, I work as kind of like an internal consultant. So working with people to help them communicate online better using social media, digital, things like that. York's an exciting place to be because it's the third biggest university in the country. And they do a lot of interesting things around, say, education. So they did the Academic Innovation Fund, and they are coming up with different ways for revolutionizing the classroom, bringing blended learning, electronic and in class together. They do a lot of interesting things with fine arts there. They just did a production of Midsummer Night's Dream that involved the digital department as well as the theater department.
Interesting.
And they did a mashup. So they're willing to experiment, and my goal is to get them to double up on that, become a little more experimental, try different things, see what works, leave what doesn't.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
What sorts of things have you helped to implement there, or what sort of things are they starting to do now since you started working there?
Well, the funny thing is, one of the things I've started implementing is a strategy. So having just left out strategy, strategy is useful because it tells you you do need to experiment, but it's good to have an idea for establishing what you want to experiment with. So again, strategies are meant to drive an organization forward, but it gives you ideas, and it gives you parameters, and it gives you guidelines. So that's what a strategy does, and that's what I worked up for the institution. They need also, just like any institution, guidelines and best practices. How do we know if we're doing the right things? Yeah. Measurement is another big one. So I'm really a big fan of measurement. So many organizations don't do it or don't do it well. Yeah. And nobody's in social media for the hell of it. Nobody's in it because it's fun. You're in it either to make money if you're private, or if you're, say, university, put more people in seats, or whatever your goal is. It doesn't matter. How can you do that without measuring? That's not even possible. But nobody, well, no, that's an exaggeration. A lot of people aren't interested in it. And it costs a bit of money because you have to pay for a digital monitoring solution. But it's so important. And that is going to drive you forward with clarity, because you'll know what's working and what's not. There's no guesswork. So
let's talk a little bit about measurement and how you, I guess, measure the ROI. Sure. What people talk about. So I'm curious, as a digital strategist or in that space, do you measure digital in a silo, or do you connect it with other aspects of the business? Like, do you connect it with the marketing? Do you connect it with sales? Do you connect it with PR?
You better be, because otherwise all those departments are working in a vacuum. And the best institutions integrate the communications. So it's not that marketing's in a silo here, and communications here, and social here. They're working together, ideally. So measurement allows you to do things like, when you've created a campaign, did you see any lift in, say, social media metrics like retweets, likes, new fans? And you can connect it to your website. So did you see more traffic going to a page that has conversion? Conversion means basically conversion to sale. Yeah. Private business, it's more units out the door. In a place like a university, it may be more signups for programs. Things like that. So that's through Google Analytics or what have you, which connects to social. And there's lots of ways you can measure this to know that social is driving traffic. You can use something called 30-day cookie, which basically allows you to see, did somebody hit the site, then go away, think about it, come back, look again, go away, and then make the sale. Because a lot of people don't even look at that. They just look at what was the last thing you did before you hit buy, which is really not a good idea. So you have all these ways to measure. Some of them are more impactful than others. I don't care too much how many followers you have on Twitter. I don't really care that much how many likes you have on Facebook. You shouldn't. You should care more about the conversation. You should care more about the engagement. Are people actually having a good conversation with you? Are they likely to want to recommend you to others? Do they want to come back and talk to you more? Are they becoming a brand advocate? That can be measured through different proxies. Sentiment's one of them. But these are the important things. These are the things that lead to a real connection that's going to get you where you need to go. So likes, sure, they're great. Fans, sure. Tweets, yes. All those things. But conversation, engagement, sentiment, those things are more important.
What value is 1,000 fans or likes or followers if no one's talking about you?
Well, that's the thing.
And if no one's advocating for you.
And there's been studies that say, a fan is worth this much money. The accuracy of those, I kind of question a little bit. But I don't want to put that down. When you take that to the next level, when you ladder that up, it's conversation. When you ladder that up, it's engagement. When you ladder that up, it's conversion to sale. All these things are part of a classic marketing funnel.
That's right.
So at the top, you got awareness, then you get engagement, and then you got, depending upon which funnel you're using, conversion to sale. So that hasn't changed since the days of, I don't know, like some guy in the corner hawking newspapers. But, you can use that for social media as well.
You're also engaged, in the local community here in Toronto. and you're one of the co-founders and co-organizers, if I might say that, for Social Media Cafe. It's obviously not a cafe in the sense that we got bricks and mortar and selling Javas and stuff like that. But tell me about how did this sort of start up, and what do you guys do?
Oh sure, yeah. So Brian Kugelman started this because he was working in London or in the UK, and that's where Social Media Cafe started. So they have these cafes around the UK, and he thought this would be a great idea. Sort of a casual drop-in space, and you come. There's experts there. There's people who are brand spanking new, have no idea about this, but you connect. So people that don't know can ask questions, can get informed. The ones that are experts there can get their name out and build their brand, that sort of thing, so it's a win-win. And we selected downtown location, we have a theme, sometimes we've done PowerPoint karaoke before, different kinds of icebreakers, but this is the beauty of social media to me, is connecting the virtual and the real.
Yeah.
So something people don't get a lot of the time is that people who love social media love the media, but they're also social. They love face-to-face. They love meeting people.
That is so true.
So that's why these things work really well.
Nice. When's the next one coming up, or what are you guys doing?
We'll probably have one in about another month, so we're near the end of April now, so sometime in May. And we're looking at the potential of doing an unconference for this, a little mini unconference. We'll see about that. But there's also all sorts of other groups around. One of the ones that I started for culture was Toronto Museums and Culture Online Collective, which is a mouthful, but it's just basically for museums and art galleries in Toronto to exchange information. And myself and a colleague from Western recently just started a little group for social strategists at universities. So all these things hopefully become self-directed and they get enough momentum that they keep going. But it's just a way to share information.
Nice.
And so you like, for all of these who have Facebook presence, you might use Google Hangouts, that sort of thing. But also face-to-face, that's always important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't have too much time, but I want to ask, over the years that you've been in the digital space, in the web space, and now the social space, and mobile space, or whatever, however you want to define or tag it, what has been the most exciting development that you've seen that whether it excites you today or whether you remember it, as if it happened yesterday, but it was many years ago? What has been that one thing that really has jacked you up over the past few years?
It's got to be social media. I mean, there's writers out there. The browser wars back in the late 90s, early 2000s were kind of fun to watch. The .com boom and bust was kind of fun to watch as long as you didn't get burned.
Yeah.
And I think the rise of social and Facebook and MySpace duking it out, Twitter coming on board, YouTube kicking corporate TV to the curb, all that was really exciting. It's revolutionary in the classic sense of the word. The old hierarchies are disestablished. It's not exactly 1789 in France, but hey, it's sure fun to watch.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most interesting thing is probably the rise of social, because when I started as a web designer, my mom didn't understand what the hell I was doing. And I tried to explain to her, well, it's a bit like creating a brochure online.
Yeah.
I have no idea how to explain social media to her.
Wow.
Because that didn't exist in its current form 6 years ago.
Wow.
So how do you explain that to somebody that has no conception of what that could be?
I just say it's like a bar.
It's like a bar.
An online pub.
I hang out at the bar all day long.
Yeah. Which is why you don't explain it to her, right?
It's a good thing that undergrad went to good use.
My second last question. What pisses you off the most about social?
I would say it's when you have relentless marketing going on. There's definitely a place for marketing on social. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, no one's in this for the fun of it. They're in it to make dollars or some other goal.
Sure.
But when you get people to turn it into a megaphone, into a one-way conversation, buy, sell, limited time, it's just such a turn-off, because you're trying to use an old metaphor, which is, the guy in the street corner selling newspapers, talking as loud as he can, and it applies to something that really doesn't work. And in some cases, it might actually get you noticed. It might get you more likes or followers. But in the end, it doesn't really lead to any better sales or any more conversion of your goals. But because you're not measuring it, you may not even know it. But it's just clouding the waters, and it's just muddying the conversation. It's bringing it back down to the really lowest common denominator. I mean, this could be so much. It could be a real relationship between two people, and it could be really engaging. But sort of turn into a marketing megaphone at the worst of times, That pisses me off.
And is that like marketing from like that individuals do, or do you cut some slack to companies because you know what they're in it for, but to individuals, I'm curious if you separate the two.
Companies learn really quickly what works and what doesn't because they'll see it in the bottom line. So I'm not so worried about them because they'll learn and they'll keep people to the curb that aren't producing. It's when you've got a consultant or something like that who's out there trying to make a name for themselves and they're just relentlessly self-promoting, or they're just turning their brand that they're representing at that time into a one-way conversation, a one-way channel. And it's not doing the brand any good, but they don't know that yet because they're just starting out or they're not measuring. It's not really doing the consultant any good because they're coming across as just a loudmouth. But because it might get temporary pickup through mention, through notice, it can actually make you some money in the short term. But it's not helping the brand, it's not helping you, and I think it just dumbs down the medium.
Interesting.
And it's not where the real value is, which is the conversation, which is having a relationship with somebody. That's what everybody wants, and that's where the value is, whether it's dollars or whether it's some other goal, is that relationship, and that's what social media can do.
Nice, awesome. Yeah. This has been great, Mark. Thanks. I really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Last question. Where can people find you online and offline if you want?
You can go to, my Twitter is Marcus64, and you can check out my website, webness.biz, webness.biz.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. And thank you for joining us. My name is Kareem Kanji. You can find me on Twitter at Kareem Kanji, and you can also go check us out online at thirdocean.com. I look forward to bringing you more conversations in the very near future. Thank you and have a great day.